It's Nathan here. Finally, there's a glimmer of hope for first homeowners. Over 50% still face unexpected costs during the purchasing process, and 1/3 exceed their purchasing budget. In this video, I'm going to go through the things I wish I knew before purchasing my first home, including one mistake that cost me thousands of dollars and hopefully you don't have to make. If you're in the market to buy a property or just interested in property in general, then this video is for you. If you're new here and you like to learn about all things property and finance, do me a little favor and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Jaden, let's talk about the first thing you wish you knew before buying your first home.
Yeah, almost 1 in 5 home buyers actually spend more than a year buying a home and looking for it, and it can be frustrating. You can spend weekend after weekend going to open home, looking for listing, calling agents, finding out the property's potentially sold. And even in a year, if you think about it, so a year ago, the market and the conditions are completely different. You could miss out on your dream home just by meandering around and not knowing what to do. Nathan, I know this happened with you with your home buying search. Like, it took you not weeks, not months, almost years to find the right home.
100%. I know when I first searched for my first home, I spent 18 months in trying to figure out what I actually wanted. I started looking at houses, I looked at townhouses, I looked at units, and I looked from the northern suburbs of Brisbane to the city. And I had about a 50-kilometer radius. I had 20 suburbs I was looking at. So the key learning I had was here. Until I was specific, I had no luck. It took me 18 months to figure that out. I was going to open homes from one end of town to the other end of town, spending hours and hours researching, looking at different areas, and ultimately I got nowhere with it. So I guess the key here is be very specific in what you want. And it wasn't until I figured out what I actually desired that I had success within 6 weeks. I decided I wanted a unit, I wanted it close to the city, I narrowed down my 2 suburbs, and I was successful in purchasing right away. Other than that, I had 18 months of toil to get to that point. So I think the key learning here I wish I knew was be very specific and narrow in your expectation.
This is always the challenge, to try and narrow down. You jump on realestate.com or domain, you probably look in, suburbs you might like and love. And a lot of times there isn't even a price on it. There's not even a listing. It just says for sale or maybe offers over. So what we probably suggest is start in the sold section. Have a look in your target suburbs. Like Nathan said, you want to really narrow down to 2, maximum 3 suburbs. Go to the sold section, type in those suburbs, type in your price budget, and work out you want to spend $400,000 on a unit and see what's available. If there's nothing in your budget, then you might need to look at the next suburb along or potentially tweak your budget, which comes to the next point. Second mistake I made was my fear of overspending. So like a lot of first home buyers, you go out there, you're not quite sure on your budget. So you might talk to a mortgage broker, find out what you can potentially afford based on sort of your deposit and your income. And you might think, well, in my mind, I only want to spend $400 a week because that's what my rent is. I want my repayments to be. And it can kind of be crippling. It can potentially limit your budget and restrict you. And Nathan, I know you had this exact situation where you were worried about overspending. You had the opportunity to probably spend a little bit more and go a little bit higher budget, but you chose not to. Why was that a mistake?
Yeah, look, I think this can go both ways. I had a fear of overspending, and I'm sure many first homeowners do, and some first homeowners do overspend. I had a fear of overspending, and I actually underspent. So my issue was I didn't want a big mortgage. I was single at the time. I was young. I was wanting to get in the market for the first time, but I actually made a huge mistake. I bought a unit which had 0 capital growth. I owned that thing for about 10 years. I ended up selling it and made a loss on it. But the problem I had here was if I'd purchased a house for a little bit more, I would have nearly doubled my money in the same amount of time. So I think the fear I had back then was overspending, and it drove me to make a decision that ultimately was probably a poor one and ended up costing me more in the long run. I think the key here is understand your budget, work out your affordability, but also back yourself, because I didn't back myself. I ended up spending really cheap and I regretted it in the end.
Now, what we're not saying here is to go out and buy $1 million home, but the thing to think about is probably your 2, 3, 4, 5-year plan and what that property is going to be doing in that time. Keep in mind, when you buy a property in Australia, it's expensive. You might get the stamp duty waived on your first purchase, but then on subsequent times, you're going to have to pay for stamp duty, which can be tens of thousands of dollars. For example, in Brisbane, on a home for, say, $1 million, the stamp duty is $40,000. It's almost 4% of the purchase price. It's huge. When you go and sell that home, like in Nathan's case, when he sold his unit, you generally lose 2 to 3% of the sale price in agents' fees. Plus, you've got other bank fees and other costs. So it can cost tens of thousands of dollars to buy and sell a home. So for that reason, if you're looking at getting in the market, you're thinking about buying a home, try and think about what it's going to look like in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Can it be rented easily? Is it going to suit your plans? What happens if you have kids, if you have a couple, if you're going to move overseas? Think about all that stuff in advance, because it's going to mean it might make sense to stretch that budget. It might make sense to buy further out. You could say, well, I might go look in a regional area and I'll live there for 6 months and move back. All these questions will help you avoid overspending, or in Nathan's case, underspending.
Yeah, Jaden, I guess to add to your point there, we're definitely not saying to go and blow out your budget, but understand what the future looks like. In my case, I bought a unit. I was single at the time. I just started my career, so I didn't want to be in a position where I had a massive mortgage and be really tight on the budget. The problem I had was when I bought the unit, I bought it for 280,000. I didn't even think ahead that I might have a family one day, or I'd settle down, or even the capital growth potential. I was just looking to find a place close to work, close to the city, in a convenient location. Now, when I bought it, as I said, bought it for 280. I was a first homeowner, so I didn't have any stamp duty, anything like that. And then all those years, 10 years later, I went to sell it. I had to pay about 2 to 3%, so about 15 grand to sell the thing. I sold it for a loss. When I take into account the body corp, the interest, and the expenses ongoing for the property, I would have been better to rent. So I think it's just being aware of your future plans. And in my situation, if I bought a house, I would have been a little bit further away from work, but I would have had far better capital appreciation, and I'd be in a better position today as a result of it. So I think it's just about thinking a few steps ahead and not being too caught up. In my situation, I was just focused on being close to work, but I didn't think about the second and third order effects of having a family one day, having a house with capital appreciation aspects versus a unit, and things like that.
The third mistake first home buyers make are the costs of buying a home. Now, we touched on it before, but nearly half of first home buyers who were recently surveyed by Finder found that they face unexpected costs during the buying process. A couple of months back, Nathan, I was helping out a young couple, Lockie and Kim, who'd bought their first home. They were really excited. They were young, busy, and actually had hired the services of buyer's agent. They forgot to tell me this though. So when I did the figures initially, I'd worked out all the budget, had enough money for stamp duty, for their 5% deposit, for the government fees. We had some money for solicitors fees, building and pest, and everything else. All gravy. But they forgot to mention that their buyer's agent was charging a $25,000 fee that was payable on settlement. So we got a week out from settlement, and suddenly they said, well, who's paying the buyer's agent? Where does that money come from? And it just completely came from left field. You really want to be upfront, have a discussion with your broker, and make sure all the costs are mapped out there. So when it comes time to settle, there's going to be enough money. In their case, fortunately, we're able to go back to the bank, adjust some of the loan figures, and have enough money to cover all the costs at settlement. It could have turned out another way if we hadn't found out early enough. So keep in mind these extra costs. Your mortgage broker will sit down, work out everything you need to work out. Some of the unexpected stuff, like I said, conveyancing, about $1,500, building and pest, about $500. Usually pay for those sort of early on the process. Moving costs, I guess, allow another $1,000 if you're hiring movers, or you just get some mates around in utes. Settlement adjustments. Sometimes you'll actually have to pay for partial rates or water that the previous owners paid, for allow another sort of $500-$600 there. And even solicitors, searches, and fees can be another $500 to $1,000. So I'd always allow a couple of percent either way, so you're not going to get caught short on the day of settlement.